spine not having the integrity of the curves, and that creates a problem. Another thing that happens is imbalance, right? So I'll see people and their hips will either be like straight up, we call that an up slip, or, and a lot of people say, oh, I have one leg longer than the other. That happens, but not as much as I hear about it. Oftentimes, if you find the release in the area that's too tight, those legs will come back to a more even length. The other thing that can happen is there's a rotation, right? Like we call it torsion. If one hip were to go down and forward and one hip to go up and back, because your pelvis is actually in parts, and there is a little bit of, and sometimes more movement. That's where you get some of that SI stuff going on, right? The sacroiliac joint is down here, and if you get some rotation in there, it's gonna create irritation really on both sides of the pelvis, even if you're just feeling it on one side, right? Because if one side goes up, the other one's gonna go down to some degree. It's all a balancing act like that. And that is commonly something like crossing legs in the same way all the time. I'm not saying you can't cross your legs, but I would say that if you start to cross your habitual way, switch it up. And then also, just as much symmetry as you can be mindful about bringing into your daily life, the better off you are. Like I said, there's gonna be so many times in your life that you cannot change what you're doing or be ergonomic, right? Like, I can't be ergonomic about chopping veggies or I'll cut my fingers off, right? Because you gotta look down, right? So if you're a chef, you're gonna have to definitely pay attention to opening up that area some more. And because all of us do stuff down here. And the other piece is what also perpetuates the curl is we live our lives here, right? Maybe sometimes here, but definitely not back here, right? We don't stand up and try and reach things. So we don't have accidental extension in our daily lives. We have all kinds of accidental flexion. So in general, we're looking for strengthening, opening up the front side by extending the back side really throughout the whole system. So yeah, like I said, and again, because that's so how we live in our activities of daily living, we are creating the neural pathways to that movement unbeknownst, right? And so we don't even realize that we're practicing it. Like, you're doing a child's pose for 8 hours a day sometimes, right? And so then that's another reason why it's harder to be aware of proper alignment, because once your body gets into a certain position, your brain adapts and thinks that's normal. And so then you got a whole bunch of things against you then. Your brain thinks, oh, this is weird. Your front side's super tight. Your back side's super weak. So it becomes this whole struggling kind of situation that puts pull on your neck and your back and really throughout the whole system. So like I said, the injuries that happen and can be too flat in the low back, which creates that herniation, too curved in the low back. So that comes from a lot of times. Sometimes you can just be born that way, right? Some of us have more of a sway back. I know I tend to it, my oldest daughter for sure. And that just might be the way it is. Now, the other reason that creates that sway back is tight hip flexors, right? So when I'm sitting down, can you see how I'm kind of almost starting to sit down, right? It's that same, so it's flexion in my pelvis. So when I sit down, that hip flexor that runs from, get this, like 3 of your thoracic vertebrae and all of those lumbar ones, right? So it's going from about here to here on these spinous processes. That's your psoas, right? They connect. And then they go through your pelvis and connect to the inside of your thigh bone. So when you're sitting here, right, we sit in this position, it's shortened position. Then when you go to stand up, if that's tight, you're gonna stand up like this, because when you go like this, it makes your low back go, ah, because it's pulling on your low back. So the hip flexors are huge to that, and also the shoulders. Because when your pecs get tight in here too, see how it's just crunching everything down. I just like you get stuck down. It's like so much harder to breathe here. It's so much harder for your organs to do their job. Like the whole thing is making you tired. It's why you're exhausted after sitting in your chair all day, is because your body's having to hold with muscles when it should be supported by bones. Yeah. And again, what the places that we do this most, there can be acute injury, of course, like you get hurt exercising or in a car accident. I would say oftentimes when you get hurt exercising, it usually is going to follow a pattern that was already there and you just didn't notice it, or it came up and you're like, oh, that's annoying, and then it went away, or like you thought it went away, but it just, maybe you did some stretches, maybe it was just irritated a bit more than normal and then it kind of stops. But usually injuries come up from patterns that we have created unbeknownst to us. So the places that we spend the longest times in a position, sleeping is a huge place that like we don't think about it, but you actually can be engaged. Like again, if you're laying on your side and you're curled in a fetal position and you've spent the day kind of already sitting in that position, those muscles are like, ooh, I know what to do. I'm supposed to contract. So then you're laying in this ball and you think you're relaxed because you're not having to be up under gravity, but actually these front side muscles are working, right? You're working while you're sleeping. So I definitely encourage people to try and sleep on their back as much as they can. I know that if you're not used to sleeping on your back, it can be like not as cozy, you know, it feels very hard to fall asleep, but if you practice something, it gets easier. And basically if you just start your night laying on your back, and if it hurts to lay with your legs straight, then put a pillow underneath. That's totally fine. And in some way that you can be as symmetrical as you can, because this is an opportunity to uncurl if we put ourselves in the right position, right? So if you're spending your day under gravity curling you up, find a way to let gravity assist that uncurl when you can. Not a big deal if you roll over to the side, but again, pay attention to sleeping just on one side, because that's gonna do some stuff too, right? And it's kind of interesting. I can usually tell what position people sleep in after working with them for a little bit. And then one of the other places you're gonna do this is at your work. Again, it might be simple enough as a desk situation, and so you're dealing with just trying to accommodate a more appropriate alignment. But I cannot stress enough how important it is to take the time to set up your workspace as ergonomically as possible, right? Like a lot of times we're having 2 computer screens these days. If that's the case, I encourage a swivel chair so that you can swivel from keeping yourself pretty neutral and swivel to one and swivel to the other. It's not like, I mean, I want people to turn their neck, but what I don't want you to do is keep going this way. Because again, I can usually tell in somebody's body, like, how's your computer set up? Oh, I have it to the left. Yep, that's because your rib cage is turned to the left. Like it really does make a difference. Your body's super adaptable, which is rad, but it's also can be detrimental if you're not paying attention, right? So, and again, setting up, as much as possible, a seat that has your knees at or below your hips, and some support that you can like put the arms, you know, things like that. So we're gonna end up getting into something and leaning forward, but if you, as long as you can like come back to it and kind of find a neutral place, right? Alrighty. Oh, another big one, just as far as injuring yourself, would be the lift and twist. So as much as you can, you really want to avoid holding lots of weight and twisting with your feet planted. It's really, it's where those discs are on their most pressure with that turning, torquing. So if you need to, you know, do that stuff, it's fine. You lift, right? Being careful. We'll talk about core in a bit, but just move your feet to do it. You really want to avoid, and like, I do this and still pick my kid up from the back seat and bring her over, right? It's not always gonna be bad, but just, again, it's a mindfulness, and that stuff will help you. Let me see if I got all that. Oh, okay. So just talking a little bit about body mechanics. So the relationship, everything's connected. So it's not like I can ever say, oh, let's just deal with the low back, right? Because when the low back is out, then it travels all the way up. So all of it is going to come back around together. So the relationship between pelvis and spine is that they are connected. There's joints that connect them, but they are in direct relationship to each other, right? So when I lift up this hip, notice how the curves in my spine change, right? Now I have some scoliosis, straight up. That one also you can be born with, but a lot of us get it just from carrying a bag, carrying a kid, you know, carrying a serving tray, things like that, always using the same arm. So this relationship to the spine is pretty straight up. Same front to back, right? I tilt my pelvis back, my spine arches forward. I tilt my pelvis forward, my spine arches back. Cat and cow, y'all probably know that one. So the important thing about saving, especially this low back area, is to make sure that your pelvis is going the same direction as your spine. So to orient us, these hip points here, we call them, they're the ASIS, anterior superior iliac spine. You don't have to remember that, but just those hip points. And so knowing that when we talk about taking them posterior, that means the hips go back, those hip points go back, like cat pose, right? And when we take them anterior, they're gonna go forward like cow pose. So we need to make sure that the spine is going, or the pelvis is going the same direction of the spine. And vice versa, but it's a little bit harder to haul the pelvis. So we'll talk about that. So this is me going forward with my pelvis and with my spine, right? There's a forward fold with the pelvis going with the spine. Here's a forward fold when my pelvis is going back and my spine is going forward. You see that difference? There's really just, my spine is not gonna curve too much more than this, and I don't want it to, because now we know that that backside isn't as protected as the front side, right? And a lot of times what's holding this up is tightness in hamstrings. And so the way that we help kind of, what I say, get your butt up off your legs is you bend knees. Oh, look, now my pelvis wants to go forward. So bending knees is a really good way to accommodate that. We'll talk a little bit more later. Now, vice versa, this is where it gets a little bit harder too, so we have to engage core. So here is my pelvis going back and my spine going back, right? Here is my pelvis going forward and my spine going back. There's a lot of times where like, see, right? It feels good. Your arms are up, booty goes back. Wonk. Here's the problem. There is a point right there where your spine is now folding backwards. And while there is support here, this is like bones pushing on bones. And that doesn't feel too good either. And especially when you're oriented in standing, now you have all of this gravity bearing down through your back. I think so they say something like 2,000 pounds of pressure through those discs, right? And then if you put your arms overhead, it even gets worse. I'm not going to show you because I don't want to hurt my back, right? So making sure that the pelvis is going along with the spine, and what works that pelvis the most is your core, right? Legs are going to feed the pelvis, so you got to have strength there, but it's the core's engagement and the pelvis orientation based on that engagement that's a big deal. It's as simple as, I cue a lot, contain your low abdominals, right? Think about it. We want to be stacked up over our bones. And right now, regardless of the size of what's coming out in the front, look, my belly's like all by itself, right? And now I'm going to take it, oh, now it's back in my pelvis where I have bones to support it instead of hanging out. It's the same as the head out here. Oh, my poor little head, my muscles are like, save it, bring it back. And that's why your neck and shoulders hurt so bad. You get it back over, your spine is like, oh yes, there's the bones. Now the muscles can be more relaxed. Yeah, and I'll give you a couple of things as we move on there. Okay, so moving along to some mobilizing, right? Stretching things that are too tight and then strengthening things that are too loose. So the too tight stuff we talked about before. This is going to be your pecs, your hip flexors, a lot of times quads, you know, a lot of stuff on the front side. The pecs lead into the biceps. Your diaphragm actually gets tight from sitting in a scrunched position. The diaphragm connects at the bottom of the rib cage and goes down and fits onto the top of the pelvis. And it's your main muscle for breathing, so it's used a lot, right? And when we're standing upright, it has this much space to move, and so the muscles are a little bit longer. When you're sitting and not paying attention to your posture, then you're in this shortened position, right? And then it's just another one of those big muscles. You try and stand up and it's like this, and it's a big muscle and it's used all the time. So that also makes it that much harder to sit up straight. So a couple of things that we can do. I like balls, and tennis balls are easy to find, so you can grab one of those. Lacrosse balls get a little bit harder. Actually have a ball drawer here. I like this one too. It's just a little bit bigger, and it's an inflatable one, and it's softer. So, you know, there's really not a wrong way to do it. It's just nice to have options. So what you would do for a couple of these, we're going to do a pec one. And you take the ball and your pecs go from your sternum across to your arm bone. And it's like, you know, big sheath here, right? And it's what gets food to your face. So, you know, it's used a lot. And you want to kind of hit it. You're not really going to harm anything. It's best not to get on bones, because then you're not really relaxing into the softness of things. And the bones, they have a little fascia around them, but it doesn't really usually get messed with as much as our muscles, because they don't get imbalanced. When your bones are imbalanced, they usually break, right? They don't have an imbalanced place that they work. So you can do this laying on your belly and just come on down to put this in the pec, right under the collarbone or something like that, right? You can lay on it, and the harder the surface is, the more intense the pressure is going to be. It seems obvious, but just so you know. And you can bring the arm up or bring it down, right? And just roll around in there. And with this self-release work, it's nice to go in and kind of find the area that you want to work on. And I will tell you, not a lot of us complain about pecs being sore. Oftentimes we complain about this neck shoulder thing, but then people say, oh, my neck hurts so bad, what should I do? And I'll say, you should try and get into your pec. And they say, what, really? And they go in and squeeze, and they go, oh my gosh, I didn't even know. I didn't know how tight it was, because it's just a silent stabilizer. So you get in there and kind of roll it around as you're laying on it, and then find a spot of interest, which usually means that there's some sensation. And with all of your release things, you're going to come into it with mindfulness like you do in your yoga class. You're going to move in slowly so that you don't run into a spot, and it happens sometimes, but you want to try not to trigger, that, oh my gosh, feeling. So you roll in kind of slow, and then you get into the spot and just lay there and just imagine things getting softer around the ball. Breath is really big in all of this stuff all the time, but definitely because the breathing allows for just a natural opening and softening action, that then you don't have to worry about pushing it. Your body's going to open up at its rate, which is going to be a lot more effective and long lasting than if you're trying to force it into a shape. So laying on the belly with the ball under the pec here, and you can do both sides. And that'll also, like I said, that'll help your shoulder stuff. The other, and so there's a lot of different ways to hit up fascial release, myofascial release. The school of technique I come from teaches us that you need to be with that release for at least 2 minutes, because that's where the fascia starts to reorganize. It's because your body's adaptable again, right? And if we don't stay there long enough, it's like, oh, that was a fleeting idea. I'm not going to change, right? Especially when you're working against 8 to 16 hours of another position, yeah? So staying for at least 2 minutes in a pose, and you can stay longer. And if you ever hit something that's so intense, you're like, I can't, even if you put something softer on the ground, it's just not happening. Just roll out of it a little bit. Come to the outside of it. Like, I kind of think about the fascial restrictions like a pile of bundled up necklaces or something. And right, trying to get it untied right from the middle is too much. But if you start pulling at the edges carefully, it can start to pull that out. So just remembering that as you come into the release work. The next place that is really good to go, this one's a little more intense. So, you decide how you want to do it, but it's such a good one. Again, especially it's the straight center of your body, the diaphragm release. Yeah, and so it's here at the bottom of the sternum, right where the floating ribs open up. Everybody has a little different kind of arch there. So you want to just get the ball where it's all soft, and you'll lay down in different ways to kind of slow it down, or putting a bolster maybe up here to rest on, right? Or you could hang out in Sphinx, or you can start to come down like that. It's hard for me to talk once I'm down there because I need to do that release too. But it is such a good one. And I say that because it usually doesn't feel really great when you're doing it.
Ambika, can you tilt your camera down just a little bit?
Oh yeah, could you not see me? Sorry. Yeah, good. Yeah, so again, it'd be kind of like a sphinx when you're in the soft tissue and just trying to find a spot that you can tolerate an amount of pressure. And then coming out of it's awesome because it's not poking into you in the middle and you have so much more space. And now this kind of feeling that's tucking your butt under and creating that flatness in your low back, it can release. So I can start to get some of this, right? Now, the other piece is gonna be hip flexors. Remember how when they were too tight, which most of us have from our sitting, it's gonna create this extension in the low back that can cause some jamming. So hip flexor release is on the ball. I have other positional stuff, but I'll just get through the ball stuff and then we can go from there. So again, you'll be on your belly. You kind of find your belly button and roll halfway between the belly button and the side of the body. Your hip flexors run from the bottom of your rib cage to the top of your pelvis in that line. Okay? It will tilt me up again. I should have had my assistant come today. Right? So anywhere along that line, a little bit lower, closer to the edge of the pelvis is going to hit up the hip flexor that runs on the inside of the pelvis, the iliacus. But then all this stuff up here, right? We know that your hip flexor starts back here, or the psoas, I'm sorry, comes from back here. So it starts right there and goes all the way down. And if you ever want to try it out, you can do it now if you want to, because a lot of people are like, why are you poking in my belly when I said my back hurt? You can always put your hand in that spot just between your belly button and your side body, and then just slide your foot back and forth. You might have to dig a little bit deeper in there, but mine's tight enough I can feel it pretty good from the top. So just so you can feel that that's actually your hip flexor, and I'm not just giving you more torture things to do. And however you orient yourself on the ground is fine. You use your legs to leverage, and you just want to find a place where you can melt down into some spot. You know, oftentimes I'm using the other leg up, hanging out in there, and just letting it, just letting it soften. Again, having your yoga breath and mindfulness, noticing other areas that might be drawing your attention that seem unrelated. Because when we get these patterns in our body, also can create oftentimes fascial restrictions. If we've just had them for a little bit of time, we might feel it pretty localized. But as the pattern starts to get deeper, right, your body starts to reach further out to stabilize you. Because if you're standing, you know, in a crooked position, this side's too weak, this side's too tight, and you're unbalanced, so you might fall over. So the longer those patterns are in there, the further they start to reach, right? They get up into your shoulders, down into your knee. Pelvis and knee, definitely, big connector there. So just that's another piece that can kind of tell you where to go with things. So I think that's good for, I think we got some good ball release there. So again, the pecs, right, middle, and then either side of the hip flexors. All right, great. Our classic low back PT, which I still think is really useful, is pelvic tilts. And the most neutral and assisted and kind of calm way to do this is on your back. And this position in general is gonna be great for your low back. So, and we call this hook lying in physical therapy, and gives the knees in the hook. And so pelvic tilts, and again, it's nice to put your fingertips on those hip points because they're gonna give you an idea of where your pelvis is in space. And a lot of this work too is proprioceptive, which means knowing where your body is in space and in what you're doing with it, and to some degree, how to move it the way you want to. Which I know sounds weird, but sometimes there are things that we're like, oh, I want to do that. And your body's like, I don't know how to turn that on. And one of those things will be this core that we're working at. So hands on the hip points, and you just rock back and forth, right? Keeping your sacrum on the ground. And that sacrum's the triangular bone, right, that your pelvis is attached to. That's where we get that SI joint. So tilting back and forth. And know that any degree of range of motion here works. So it could even be like imperceivable to the outside eye. But just that little bit of motion, anterior and posterior, helps to bring nutrition to the discs. So the discs in between, the only way that joints, and this is joints in general throughout your body, the only way that they get nutrition is from the synovial fluid in the joint, because blood vessels do not run to the inside of the joint. They run peripheral to it, to the outside of the joint capsule. So you're not getting your nutrition from bloodstream or oxygen delivery that way. But you have that synovial fluid in each joint, like the tiny up here joint, you know, like all of them. And so to wash and clear that joint out, we have to move it around. And my favorite analogy for this is like, so you got a hot sink of soapy water and a super dirty sponge. If you just throw that sponge in the water, will it be clean? No, it will not. We have to rinse it out. So the movement of all the joints is what helps keep that nutrition to the joint. So that's why it's really important that when you do have an injury or pain, that you're not completely stagnant. And it can be counterintuitive because we hurt. And when we hurt or don't feel good, we've been told that we need to rest. But the problem is your body does not rest or find health being completely still. That's why we have systems that always run, right? We don't have an off button. Yeah, it's too creaky. That's why you wake up in the morning feeling more stiff. It's because you haven't been moving around enough. And there's some folks that sleep on more uncomfortable beds because really it helps with immune system and joints and things like that. I'm not going to go that far. I like my soft bed, but you know, just remembering that even laying on your back and just doing itty bitty millimeter movements of that pelvis is helping with your nutrition of your discs. Okay, so then since we're there, we're going to talk about the core engagement because it just lends itself so well to this position. One thing I'm going to tell you, I don't like to use the word never, but I really hate crunches straight down the middle. I don't think that they are good. I know that they are not good. I'm telling you, you don't have to do crunches. Now, obliques across the body, I'm down with. But the thing about crunches are, I have to go back up anatomy a little bit. So the parts of the core, you got the rectus, which is your six pack. Looks cool, but what it does is it brings your sternum to your pubic bone. Which I don't feel like we need to practice this. I feel like we're practicing this all the time. And especially when you're on your back, because it's not even, like if you were sitting up and doing reverse crunches, then at least you're gonna get some back extension under gravity. But when you're laying down on the ground, it's just like, right, and then blah. No. So that's not, we don't wanna be there. Obliques, the reason going side to side is effective is because those guys run on either side and they actually help to support the side bodies. Yeah, and then the master of it all is the transverse abdominis. And it's the deepest layer, and it is the one that is designed to support your back, right? Your butt is not meant to support your back. It can protect it in a way that it stops movement, but our supporting muscles are oftentimes on the other side, right? So this transverse abdominis runs exactly like a corset muscle, and that's what it feels like when you have it engaged. Your back comes towards your front and your front goes to your back, right? As opposed to rectus, where my front goes to my back and that's it, right? We want that hugging in. So guess what? The transverse abdominis is also known as Uddiyana Bandha. Yeah, it's that navel center in and hooking up. And Uddiyana means flying, and it helps you to fly your rib cage away from your pelvis. Yeah, and so there we are, decompressing the low back instead of, right, dumping into it. So to find that, and this is one, you don't have to do it right now, but this is one of the harder concepts, and I would say probably one of the most important outside of the positional, is the finding the transverse abdominis engagement. And unless you've learned how to use it, maybe through Uddiyana Bandha or because somebody taught it to you, you haven't turned it on consciously before. It's probably turned on, for sure, but you didn't know it, and so therefore trying to turn it on is gonna feel kind of like a math problem. This is the times where it's like, just let me do crunches and make my body tired and I will just be better. But guess what? It's the mindfulness that's going to be more holistic and helpful to your whole body. So good way to find that, you're laying on your back, hips, or hands on the hip points, right? And it's good to do some pelvic tilts because it gives you the extremes of one side and the other. And then finding a neutral spine here, which again, just doing this on your back is good brain work. It's teaching your body how to find neutral in a position that's more assisted by gravity. So then to find this neutral position, you want to have a sense of all 3 points of your sacrum. So that's the 2 hip points here and then the tailbone, right there, making a triangle, having those 3 points evenly on the ground. You should have a little bit of a curve in your back, right? More than you think. We're not going to flatten the back down because we know that a flat back is not alignment, is going to create more disc issues. So you want to have that curve in the back. You take your hands on the hip points and then just incite it to where it gets soft. That's going to let you gauge when the muscles turn on. And so then to turn on your transverse abdominis, you're going to take your navel to your spine without flattening your back to the ground. And there is a degree of your spine moving towards your navel as well. There's a little bit of extension there to support it. Now, think, okay, well, if I'm taking my navel to my spine, how am I supposed to hold this and breathe? Well, you're going to breathe into your rib cage now. Instead of letting the belly go out as you inhale and draw in as you exhale. Diaphragmatic breathing is great, but it's not the only kind of breathing we have. And so practicing, I usually tell people to do this for 2 to 5 minutes every morning until it starts to make a little more sense, be a little more accessible. Drawing the navel back towards the spine and breathing in the rib cage without hardening through your neck and jaw, which is a tall order because you're going to be sitting there trying to figure out how you take your navel to your spine and your spine to your navel and breathe. Yeah? So know that it is a journey, but it's a journey that's worth it because then you can start adding that same feeling in as you stand up, right? As you sit. Some of the biggest things are like that tend to fatigue people and exacerbate these issues are like doing the dishes, right? You wouldn't think it's a big deal, even if you're not loading a dishwasher that's down low, but just this little bit of flexion without holding your belly, right? So just getting that drawing back so that you're supporting your spine, and it really does feel like that, right? You'd like contain those low abdominals, you hug everything in, you insulate the spine, You don't have to live like that all day long. You take breaks, breathe your diaphragmatic breathing for sure. We want that. But paying attention to when you're in positions where you are not able to find a neutral spine and you have to be in that prolonged kind of movement, making sure that your front has your back is really, right? You want to make sure, because this is just the front of your back. We forget that because we don't see in the middle, but it's all connected that way. So that transverse abdominis engagement is really important. If you're like feeling frisky, oh, I want more, this isn't enough, right? Take your time, because if you add on without having that connection, it'll go back to your back. Yeah? So doing more, and this is always hard for me when I take a Pilates class, because I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna make my core stronger. I will add the bells and whistles. And my back's like, dude, you're not that strong yet, right? So making sure that you wait till you're really strong, but you can also then, once you feel like, okay, I kind of got an idea about this, trying to lift one foot up at a time without letting your pelvis tilt at all. It's tough, but the core engagement is gonna help stabilize your hips, right? Which then, stable hips means stabler back, because then we're not woogity woogity all over, giving the low back too much movement that it can't deal with. So that's a huge one. All right, so a nice undo for the day. If you're sitting in your chair, you can take, I'm just gonna do my bolster because it's easy and at hand, but you can also just roll up a blanket or a towel, something that's long like that, and do a little supported back extension. So your butt stays down, right? Because we wanna find a place where we can have a little bit of curve in the low back. The big piece to this is for folks that have this flattening issue. Because then as we lay down, right, and I got to get my butt just a little bit out of my back, but now I have this nice supported arch in my back, and then also that support to uncurl. It's really lovely. Sometimes we need a little something under the head, depending, right? You don't want to feel all thrown about. But man, if you can do this for 5 minutes every day when you get out of your chair, right? Just like a little shavasana for your workday. Clear the slate, let go of the stuff. That's a big one. And then another great one that's pretty mellow for the end of the day that can be great for the SI joint, for neutralizing that. Unfortunately, this isn't a great size chair, but it'll work. It's nice if I had something a little bit deeper. And I'm looking for like a 90-ish degree angle here. Now you can do this just hanging out with the knees kind of neutral. You could also let the legs drop out to the side a little bit, and that'll get to your hip flexors a little bit more. Remember how it attaches to the inside of the thigh bone? So that can be nice. Or if you have a tie or a belt or something like that, belting your legs hip distance so that you can just let the hips relax. Because for a lot of us, this is gonna be our seated position that's tightening the hips, right? So being able to kind of tie the legs together so you don't have to muscle it and keep the thighs right there in neutral, the knees coming right over the hips so that the thigh bones can settle down into the pelvis. This is especially nice if you have an over curvature in your low back, right? If you have that sway back, because it brings some nice neutrality to it. Again, bringing in that slow, deep breath. And all of this stuff is definitely going to shift and help your body, but it's not going to be like taking an ibuprofen, right? So remembering that it's a journey through things and to meet your body where it's at all the time. Okay, so as far as strengthening, we talked about core needs some strength. Even though it's on the front side, we're not usually engaging the right part, right? So we need to engage the core that works the front and the back. The other piece that is weak is our back extensors. Yes, we talked about how these get long, so it makes it that much harder to find back extension. And so with that, there's an easy way to do, let me tilt this up so you guys can see me. And you can also do this on the floor. I just think you're gonna be able to see me better at a wall. And it also works at a wall if you're not into getting up and down off the floor as easily. So you're gonna cactus the arms. Yeah, you got all of me? I like feet hip distance, right? It just helps stack the bones nicely. You're gonna get the arms more or less in line with the shoulders, if anything a little lower, right? When we start to get higher, we're dealing with something else in the back. So backing up as much as you can to the wall, get the backs of the hands. Maybe it's not going all the way there, that's okay. You're just gonna try and find what you can to fit against the wall. I'm gonna keep my chin level to the ground and then push my hands and elbows and my head back into the wall, keeping the chin down, right? Watching not to get into the shoulders and all that. What I want to be feeling is the muscles back in the triceps, the posterior deltoid, between the shoulder blades, right? These guys that uncurl us. Of course, there's back extension in cobra poses, things of that nature, but a lot of times if we don't have the neutrality in the pelvis, because when we're doing those on the belly, it's so much harder to get up against gravity in the appropriate way, right? We find ourselves in these cobra poses. We find ourselves in cobra poses that are perpetuating this curl, right? Here I am using my pecs all stuck. I'm not using my back extensors really that much at all, right? So remembering that we need to extend with the back body. So again, like I said, standing at the wall is a great way to practice that, or laying down on the ground, and you're gonna press the elbows, the backs of the hands, even the tops of the shoulders back. And remember that you don't use those muscles as much, so you have to think about them, like decide if you want to think about pressing with every inhale or with every exhale, because you got to come back to them to remind them. The fact that we can't see what's going on back there also makes it harder for us to talk to our body, to have that proprioception back there. So, and when you're doing isometric holds, like 5 to 8 counts. Want to do about 5 or 5 breaths. Really nice to be able to do that. So that feeling that extension and then not just doing it because I said it's going to make you feel better or something like this, but using it again as a time to connect with a part of your body that you don't connect to all the time, right? Notice what is feeling fatigued. Make sure that it's the appropriate thing. You shouldn't feel it up in the tops of your shoulders. You really should feel it more towards the back line of the body and up higher. And then also when you're there, add that transverse abdominis engagement, right? Making sure that you got your low abdominals contained in the pelvis. Nice to do if you know you have tighter hip flexors or that kind of problem. It's nice to do the ball release stuff beforehand. Yeah, so you're not hauling and like causing more strain than necessary or overworking because that front side stuff is pulling on you so hard. Yep. Right, so for folks that have sciatica, so sciatica is usually tight glutes piriformis usually in general, which is an external rotator in our hips. So again, a lot of times if you sit and your knees drop out to the sides, that's gonna create a tightness in the piriformis. And then also, we tend to grip our butts a lot to protect ourselves. And Mr. Iyengar has some funny stuff about about our bun gripping. And there are times that it's appropriate to use your glutes, and there are also times it's appropriate to just use part of your glutes and not all of your glutes, right? We got the max, the mid, and the min. So, and I'll tell you a little bit about two of those in a minute, but tight glutes is something that is a big problem for a lot of people. So you could stick a ball in it, go figure, you know, lay down and put that ball underneath the glute. I'm sorry. And so part of what creates that sciatic problem, which is the nerve that runs down the back of your leg, and again, it gives you symptoms like numbness and tingling and maybe weakness and pins and needles and things like that, is because the nerve runs through, for some of us more than others, some have an anomaly that makes this worse, the nerve runs through the piriformis. And so when that muscle's too tight, it just pinches on it. That's ultimately any kind of nerve stuff, which includes pain, is either from inflammation or from like a restriction from the muscle. It's a pinching, right? It's just irritating the nerves. So we can do that with stretch, like I said, with the ball in there. The stretch we would do, I like, you know, pigeon poses there. Oh, actually, I'll show it to you up here so we don't have to get on the ground for everything. But this can also be done two other ways. So this is a figure 4 stretch, right? And it's great. You can get to your house. You can do this at work halfway through your day. We're not doing it back here, right? We're going to try and find a neutral spine, something where the knees are at or below the hips. And you simply cross one ankle over the other, right? First, sitting up tall before you go anywhere else, because we are actually already at a 90-degree forward fold in the hips, yeah? Then if you want to go further, you can reach with the sternum and come forward. Now, if getting your leg up here is not happening yet, that's okay. We can do it either crossing the ankle right here, right, and leaning forward just a bit, or maybe even if you had a step, or I got a block right here, and I could take this, right? So it's just about having some external rotation in the thigh. This is a great one for the piriformis. If you are able to get on the ground, same thing here, right? And sometimes this is a little bit easier than sitting up because I can change the angle of my pelvis a little bit better. Can you guys still see me? Okay. Right? When I was sitting, my thigh had to be right here because I was sitting. But when I'm on the ground, I can take that thigh back. So if you're able to get on the ground, this is also a really great place to be. Yeah, and then taking this shape from the ground over to the side. Oh, yeah. And that right there just makes this nice line from my kind of middle sacrum all the way across, hits that piriformis right in the middle, gets some IT band. Yeah, and all of that is good. So yeah, your figure 4 that starts here, and then you just take that shape over to the left. Sometimes you want to make sure your foot's high enough that your hand could reach it, and that'll give you the right line of pull. So that's a really good stretch to address sciatic nerve, but also just low back tension. Because like I said, we do often use the glutes too much, and there gets to be this, like, I feel like my butt's stuck on the back of my shoulders feeling, right? And see how there's that compression is happening there. So getting the release of the top of the glutes, outside of the glutes can help. Something a little bit more mellow would be a sciatic nerve glide. So nerve gliding is you know, your nerves all start from your brain and then go out to your spinal cord and then send out to your ends. And when you have some adhesions or restrictions along the neural line, they can be released by us kind of sliding that nerve back and forth. There's a way to put neural tension, and that's not what we want to do. We want to slide back and forth, and it can actually help to break up some of those adhesions, and it's kind of like you're moving the joints around. Motion is lotion. So it's as simple as, crazy enough, and I'll show you one seated as well, taking a leg forward, and you're gonna come forward and lift your head up a little bit, and then pull your hips back and round your head, keeping the foot down. So we come forward, lift the chest, and then as we bring the head down, you gotta make sure to keep the toes down, because that is a piece to it. And it doesn't have, it's not supposed to really be stretchy. Yeah, so if this coming forward was a lot, you could have some blocks or something to hold on here. Then seated, that just is a little bit nice flow if you want to do that. But seated, it's pretty simple. So we're going to flex the foot and look up. So it's like toes and face go one way, and then head and foot go down. Head and foot go up. Head and foot go down. Yeah. Toes and face up. Toes and face down. Again, it's not going to feel like a lot, and it shouldn't. And if it hurts, do a smaller range of motion. And you only do max 10 of those. Okay? But again, what it's supposed to do is it takes the nerve sheath has a little bit of give in it, right? So that we can stretch and move around and do all the things we want to do. And when you get like little crunchy spots on there, again, that can push and create pain. And so that is a good way to hit that up in a really mellow way. Yeah? Good. Nerve glides. I just remembered that this afternoon. Okay, so back extensors like we talked about, and that really basic cactus either on the ground or at the wall, and then also then bringing that awareness into all your back extension in your practice. Now the last piece that is generally fitting into our weakness is the glute med. So max is the big one, right? It's kind of up here. It's tight, holds into the middle. That's the one that stops our back bending because it just closes off this low back. Glute med is on the side. It's the one that takes your leg out. It abducts, right? AB, taking it out to the side. It also stabilizes your pelvis. So it does this, right? Now you ever see people walking around like this, or maybe they're just doing it on one side. It's called a Trendelenburg gait, and it's from weakness in the outside of the hips. And so you can imagine, even if both sides were doing it, how much more work this is for your back and your spine and your whole body. And then especially if it's just one side doing it, now you got all this imbalance through your pelvis, right? That's going into the low back and the knees. So the glute med helps to stabilize your pelvis for your low back and attaches to the IT band and helps to stabilize the knee. So it's a really important one, and there's a lot of different ways to strengthen your glute med. It can be as simple as standing, hold on to something, because then you don't have to think about the balance, right? always, always, just because we're doing the glute med stuff doesn't mean we're gonna, right? We're gonna practice always bringing in that mindfulness, getting up over. And the thing about it is you need to lead with your heel. Right? You don't want to turn the toes out. You lead with your heel, swing it out to the side and come back. It's also not just the leg going out that's working, but this hip, right? We don't want to be, it's kind of hard to do anyway because you get too short. You want to make sure, right, that you're upright and supported on the outside of the hip as well. Ooh, and it just comes in right away. Now, in our yoga practice, it comes in a lot of different ways, but one that's super obvious is just balance, right? And so tree pose, sometimes, I mean, I can balance here. I gotta tell you though, my knee feels so like hedgy because it's locked out, right? I'm either straight or like weird bent. Yeah. So when you're balancing and on that single leg stance, really feeling that hip wrapping in, and you can even, I teach this a lot in my classes, do a little kickstand tree pose, and then doing some, I think at school they called them Elvis Presley hips, right? But making sure it's coming from the hip, that you're not hiking up from your toes, right? Back and forth. And then as you start to feel more comfortable with this position, you can do it balancing too, right? So those are really good, just simple ones. And there are plenty after that I could give you, but I don't want to throw too many things at you. So I'd say play with some of those ones, and then if you are looking for more, you can always Google glute med, M-E-D, it means, short for medium. And that one's kind of nice to do before the figure four. Sorry, I didn't put that in the right order for you. But because the figure four stretch is gonna help to mobilize that area, it's good to get some strength in there, but we don't want it to get too tight, right? And if we're overworking in the glute max, that big guy behind, it's gonna try and take over. So you really gotta make sure that your pelvis is in the right orientation, because it's your bottom sticking out that is gonna get you like junky in the low back and hips. Okay, I think that will be that. So just for some basic asana application, right? So big one is forward folds, especially if you have herniated discs, right? Forward folding, well, spinal flexion is contraindicated, meaning you don't want to do it when you have a herniated disc, right? Because we said when we go like this, that's when the disc pops out the back. So obviously, this is not going to help you. And guess what? It's not even getting to my hamstrings, which is what I'm trying to get to help my back. So you want to make sure that you're bending from the hips. And if you're having a hard time tilting the pelvis, that knee bend, right? We know is going to make it so then the muscle doesn't have to cross both your knee and your hip. So we can get to turning the pelvis. So a lot of times forward folding, you can do at a chair, right? Making sure to bend the knees, put the hands down. Now, here's another piece to this. The hard thing about putting your hands on something is that we go, bleh. Did they show it? I'm here, and I go, oh my gosh, and my low back's like, why? Is this better for me? This is no bueno. You gotta make sure to contain those low abdominals. If you're gonna deviate from this lined up position, either way, you gotta get your support, your middle supporter on board. This is where it is at to keep this safe, yeah? So coming forward, really pulling the belly back, maybe bend the knees, or flexing at the pelvis so that my hip points are going forward, so my pelvis is going with my spine, right? The other great thing is halfway up position, that Ardha Uttanasana. This can be done with a chair, right? You can have blocks, or you can put your hands on your thighs again. But look how I'm not here. And I know this position because when my back is bugging me, right? You ever get up off the chair and you're like, oh my gosh. It's called torturous recovery. And we all know why, because it doesn't feel very good, right? So what you gotta make sure, if you have especially a herniated disc, is that you are being so conscious about keeping the curves in the spine intact, right? So you're only gonna go as far forward as you can do that, and making sure that the core is engaged. There are times, and I don't think I fully herniated anything, but after the second kid, it was real uncomfortable. And there are times, depending on the practice, that a forward fold is not appropriate for me. And so when forward folds are offered, I'm either finding a position where I can keep the spine neutral to get into my hamstrings, or I'm finding some spinal extension, because that extension is helping to put the disc back into place, to hug it back in so it's neutral and not squirting out the backside, right? So forward folds, standing look like that. Sitting, sorry for my technology problems, friends. Sitting, really great to lift yourself up, right? Just like we were talking about maybe a little bit in a chair, but if you're on the ground, you want to make sure that you got your butt up so that your pelvis can turn again, right? If we get stuck up on underneath here, it's not good. We're in our flexion. But getting up on a blanket, and check it out. Do you see how I'm kind of tilting forward here? Maybe my block will show it more. There's a way for me to sit on my block, and it's better because my knees are down. At least I'm not this way, right? But I could do better. And I do that by either you can pull the flesh back, or if I just scoochie forward. Do you see now how it's lifted my butt up, taking the hip points forward? It's like I think about my pubic bone dropping down to the earth. Yeah, I put my hands here so you can kind of see a little bit better. When I was here before, my butt was kind of stuck and tucked under. This is my hip points going back, right? And my spine coming forward so I don't fall backwards, right? But now, when I find that tilt, it supports the curve in my back. I actually can relax pretty good. Look, even the belly came out. And I still got a curve in my back. Yeah, and this is gonna be some of the most supported. It is nice to be up against a wall if you're gonna be in a prolonged sitting position, but if you can get this curve going on, a lot better. And then as far as your forward fold, if you're needing to deal with this, maybe you're just sitting at a 90-degree angle, right? And or bending those knees up, right? So again, that we can get this turn the pelvis so the spine and the pelvis are moving the same direction. It's really just more, before we try and fold ourselves in half, we want to make sure that we can find that neutral spine and keep that for as long as possible. It's not that we don't have asanas that we are creating flexion in the back. We do. But we want to make sure that the asanas that are meant to extend or be neutral are, right? So another one that comes into play that should be with a neutral spine and often gets missed is triangle pose. And Trikonasana is such a wonderful pose. It really is made for people with herniated discs because you can stretch your hamstring without having to fold forward at all, right? So with the triangle pose, 1 foot towards the short edge, 1 foot towards the long edge. The caveat is that oftentimes So, right, the tilting of the pelvis gets me into my hamstring and that front leg, right? So there's that stretch that's so lovely. But what ends up happening is then we put our arms down and we turn it to a side bend, right? And what it's supposed to be is our neutral spine, head, pelvis tilting on our thigh bones. So that, right? So that both side bodies are the same length. And the way to find this is to, instead of thinking about long through this side, right? We want to get long through this side, because check it out, gravity's on this side right now. Up here, gravity was up here, because it was a lot easier to keep that spine neutral. Now we're changing the game. Now gravity's here, right? And it feels real good to stretch that out, but if some folks have bad enough back stuff, that's not going to work. So you actually need to shorten that top side, right? Contract this side to make this side longer. And it also gets you way in more to that hamstring and all that stuff. So it is very, very good to, if you want to control that a little bit more, gauge it a little bit more, hands on hips, right? Instead of, because the thing about this one is it kind of, the arms tend to make you excited and heavier and things like this, right? So bringing it in so you're right there with your center, knowing where the center is going, and then having something close by so that you can support that working into the extension of the underside, contraction of the upper side, yeah? And of course your core is on because you're not in a neutral position. All right, just real quick, warrior one. So this is a back bend, and because our leg is behind our pelvis, yeah? If I'm standing up, this is the back bend we think about, but really my pelvis is in front of my hips, yes? So anytime that we're taking the leg behind the pelvis shoulders, it's gonna be a back bend. In our warrior one, it's so easy to dump. It's a hard pose. I mean, it doesn't look hard, but you know, if you've done warrior one, there's a lot to it. So you gotta be careful of that hangout, kind of hanging on the shelf of the kidneys and the low back, right? Here's where that Uddiyana Bandha comes in again. Really drawing the navel in, and then I'm in a back bend, which means my spine is going back, even though it doesn't feel like it right now. So I have to lift those hip points up, right? To bring my pelvis in the same direction. If I don't, this is what starts to happen. Yeah, and then you increase and it's no bueno. It's all junky in there, right? Then in warrior two, you have a different problem because the legs are out to the side. It feels so good, right? And we're like, oh, thank goodness. That warrior one was hard and grippy. Now I can be big. But we get out here and we, right, lose those low abdominals, the butt's behind, we're jamming up in the hip and the low back. So it's, again, as simple as containing low abdominals. I just try and think about, like, I want my organs and my material in that container of the pelvis. And really throughout your day, just, you know, if you notice your back is bothering you, or you've been standing for a while and you're getting fatigued anywhere in your body, just kind of be like, where are my low abdominal contents right now? Where did I leave those? Oh, look, they're spilling on the floor, right? It's just a little bit, and try to avoid any kind of adjustment that, again, is like a quick one. We're like, ugh. And I want you to think about shortening the front side, but I want you to think about containing and really lengthening the back side so that you can make more space in that area. And so that segues us to a back bend, camel pose, but this is also done, you know, camel pose is also bridge pose on your back, or Dhanurasana, bow pose on your belly, right? It's just all in different places. So, but the camel pose, and we can do this standing too. It doesn't have to be on knees. I just think the camera will catch me better this way. So again, remember how oftentimes, because we open our chest and it feels real good and the butt goes back and like, you just don't have a lot of places to go here, right? It's gonna get pretty stuck. So remembering that again, I gotta contain those low abdominals, lift my hips up, and then as I move my hips forward, making sure to lift through the chest, right? As opposed to dumping into the low back, making sure that you're staying lifted as the hips come forward and the elbows hug in. And this is so amazing for tight hip flexors. Like back bending is what fights the curl. It's gonna keep you off a walker for regular reasons. You know, sometimes we get into accidents and we can't change that outcome, but in regular just moving through your life, back bending is the key, right? And again, like we talked about, when you're all curled up, your organs can't work, you can't breathe as well, all that stuff. So working through back bends in an accessible way, when you're doing this on your back in bridge pose, yeah, right here. I really like to get a block to keep track of my knees, because when the knees move out to the side, that's when the butt, the glute med is hardening, and you just stop your back bend, right? And we know that a lot of times the butt's already too firm there at the top of the glute. So when you put the block in, you're still gonna use some of your glutes, but it's gonna use the part that we want to instead of the one that gets overused, yeah? Because that just keeps us in there. So the part that I find is a little bit more obscure in this, pressing the feet down makes sense, right? The rolling the shoulders under and getting your back extension in, right? Which we did at the wall. Same thing. Now I'm going to push my hands and my elbows and my shoulders down. And then the other pieces, reach your knees away. And there's that hip flexor piece, right? It's so easy to get stuck here where my pelvis is going forward and my spine's going back, which we know is not going to be helpful. So, right, sweeping those glutes to the back of the knees, tailbone through the knees, and then keeping with that back extension as well. So, so, so good for that. And if you're doing back bending with that awareness of core, pelvis to spinal alignment, and the extension through the actual back body, right? Not just trying to thrust your head back, things like that. It's amazing what kind of healing can come out of that. Ooh, you know, I could go on for more and more. Let me just say one last thing. Just activities, like I said, doing the simple stuff, lay on your back, get to know your transverse abdominis. But then places, like I said, where we tend to not support ourselves when needed is like the dishes thing, the laundry, just these repetitive movements that don't seem like a lot of work, but it's sustained holding of your low back in that little bit of flexion space, right? Remember, gravity right here, good, supporting it. Gravity now here, now my back is doing stuff. So you gotta make sure that core is engaged. And then the same thing with walking, having a better kind of, right, there's a way that I can walk, and I'm pretty flexible, and so like I just kind of hang on my joints, right? When you're tired, you're like, oh man. But that really does, especially if you're going for an exercise walk, if you're kind of hanging out in the joints, it's gonna make everything hurt a lot more. So just having, again, that awareness of the center of you, so that when you're walking, it's not hard, not a hardening around there. It's, I mean, corsets sound really yucky, and I'm glad we don't wear them all the time, but they're stabilizing, right? And when we have that proximal stability, then we can move freely without overstraining, over moving, using the bones to be our support with the muscles to help us move. Okay.
That was amazing, friend. Amazing. One of the best workshops I've ever seen on low back. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much.
So there were
yeah, questions?
So Megan, I'll let you ask your question. Amber, you had a question too, and anyone else. I'm sure she'd be happy to try to answer.
Okay. When you were talking earlier about ergonomics at work, I have a standing desk, and I wondered if you have recommendations for the ergonomics for a standing desk.
Yeah, sure. So it's great because you don't have to deal with the whole chair situation and all of that. But you definitely want to have a position where when you're standing, pretend like I am, your arms can be, your elbows kind of back, maybe under shoulders, right? If it can be at this level and not something where you have to take your arms forward, right? So you want to be able to stand up and have this going on. I think as far as how you're setting up your desk, that's the best way. And then also always having your screen in line with like a level chin to the ground. Yeah, because a lot of times we get here and does a lot of things all the way through. So making sure you have that screen at a level to your eyes kind of situation, and then shoulders here. The standing, I would say, again, you just gotta watch, right, that how you can still be lined up and be kind of dumping on it. So, throughout the day, just having a little bit of awareness. And then as you get better with that transverse abdominis, it's not like I'm in plank pose, because it's great. Gravity is not pushing on my belly as much as it would in plank pose. But just making sure you're coming back to where those low abdominal contents. Yeah. So, yeah, because that's where we kind of, you get into your thinking. It's probably going to be kind of like forward head and low abdominal contents, or would go away when we get out of our body and get up in our brain. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
You're welcome. Who is it? Oh, what are crunches? We went over crunches, right, Peter?
And he left already. But
he did. Okay.
Amber, are you still here? I see that at least Box is still here. Oop, you're still on mute, Amber.
How about now?
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hey.
Hi.
With the reclined figure 4, when you twist it off to the side, I could only really feel it in the front, and I have like the really tight piriformis thing. So I want to make sure that I'm getting it right to get benefit out of that.
Okay, so sometimes if you don't have the foot high enough up, right, if it's down here, sometimes it will just get that. So you want to make sure that it's close enough. I say for the hand to get the foot and maybe up a little bit further.
Okay.
It's line of pull, and sometimes when you're really tight, you might not feel it for a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's why the at least 2-minute thing is really helpful. And it can be hard when we want to get a sensation out of a stretch and it's not there. Yeah. We try and force other things, but sometimes it's simply like your body's just protecting you because it is so like sore, fragile, precarious. So setting it up into an environment where it's really comfortable. I mean, even sometimes making it less twisty by putting a block under your foot. Because sometimes it's just too much and your body's just like, no, I'm holding on. So even adding a little support to it and seeing how it goes.
Okay. I only tried it for like 10 seconds while you were talking about it. So I fully explore it. So, okay, perfect. Thank you.
No problem.
Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? Sheila, do you have any questions? I would just want to encourage you, don't be shy.
Yeah, no, I love them.
I would like to ask, I had emailed to give you preview that I was interested in the pinched nerve in the back. So listening to you talk about all of this, I think that I had it in my head that to alleviate that pinched nerve in the lower back, I should curl up, because it would open up the bones in the spine. I guess I don't know exactly what words to use.
Yeah.
But that's potentially causing maybe some of that herniation and allowing to sneak out. Is that maybe, like, I'm seeing it differently in my mind after hearing you talk?
Yeah, I would say, and I reminded myself about your diagnosis, and so yeah, it's more exposure, right, of the nerves back there. So yeah, I would say finding as much neutrality as you can is probably going to be the best. The nerve glides is kind of what I was thinking about for you, just as being something mellow to kind of just see where you're at with that. And potentially, like, I would go slow with this. Like I said, a lot of that diagnosis is starting from a younger age, and they have a lot more issues with it than what you have. So they didn't have a lot of therapy stuff. It was just like bone, like strengthening, make sure you have exercise, but make it low impact. So just going gently into neutrality, and then just working a little bit with slowly, and always checking with your doctor if you have any questions about those things, but some very mindful back extension, active extension.
Okay.
Right? So like super baby cobras that have good support from the upper back and the core.
Okay.
Yeah. But just like just going so slow, and going through all of that pelvis alignment and all that kind of stuff. And again, making sure your back is doing it. You're not trying to shove with your strong arms which can exacerbate it. That's why I feel like just being careful about positional back extension to make sure that it's not too much.
Okay.
Yeah. But the nerve glides, but yeah, the way that I know about it is, as far as your diagnosis, is that is the flexion is going to create more irritation.
Yeah, I just had it backward in my mind. So
yeah, I know. And well, a lot of us do, because we're like, oh, my back hurts, I need to stretch it by folding forward. And it's actually it hurts because it doesn't have enough extension. It's too folded forward kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to focusing on that and seeing if it gets better.
Yay,
I think it will.
I'm so glad that you know that now too. It makes me very happy.
And there's my cat.
I love the kitties. That's the best part of Zoom. Anybody else have any questions? I'm so happy to answer anything, even if you don't feel like it makes sense.
I just want to say thank you so much. It was very good, very informative, and you just taught in a manner that was so easy and clear. Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Great workshop. I've got a left shoulder that's kind of bothering me. Will that putting the ball on the pecs, will that help loosen up that shoulder?
For sure. Yeah, and it's hard because especially if it's in the back, we feel like, oh, I want to put it where it hurts. And you totally can, but it's usually the tight front side, or the tight sides don't talk as much. I call them stoic stabilizers. They're like, I do a job. And a lot of times it's the back overstretched side that gets more symptomatic. So try that stuff in the pecs and see if that doesn't help, because it's going to allow you to get your shoulders where they belong. And that's going to make everything just a lot happier in general.
Okay, because on a wall, I can get my right one against the wall, but I can't get my left shoulder back against the wall.
Yeah. So that would definitely be indicative of some tightness in the front. It could be, other thing, but the pec is always a good place to start because, like I said, it covers a lot of landscape and it does a lot of the stuff that we're getting done all day long.
Okay, thank you. That was a great workshop. Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming.
Luann, did you have a question? You have to unmute
I
yourself
do.
if you do. Okay, great.
Okay. I have a muscle on the inside of my leg that if I bend down at times, it's really tight. And I'm wondering if my knee's hurting because of that too.
Well, yeah, usually it's good. Yeah, knee stuff either comes from weirdness in your thigh or your calf. So if you can do, if it's the inner line of the leg, you could do some butterfly pose to open up the inside of the leg. But I would say also getting both sides of it, also working something like a hero's pose so you have internal rotation as well, if that's not something that you cultivate a lot.
What is that?
Oh, hero's pose. So knees come together, and I like to have a block. I don't know. Unfortunately, this is one of those times where, because I don't get to work with you or see how your body moves, I'm not sure if it, how to modify this exactly for you. But you could try with something that has some support. So with this pose, the knees are together and the feet are wide, and you sit down so that your thigh bones turn in.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I have my thigh bones turning in, and then the cobbler's pose is with the thigh bones going out. Yeah.
And do you hold those poses for how long?
Like I said, I like to do about 2 minutes.
Okay.
If we're trying to make shifts. Yeah, and it's not that quicker stretching doesn't have efficacy and usefulness. It's just a different level that we're going into.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Good class.
Thank you so much.
All right, well, I'll send everyone the link to the video, and my apologies, I missed like the first 6 minutes and then remembered, thank goodness, to turn it on. We would have been so sad if we couldn't see that again. But Ambika, thank you so much. How wonderful, and I hope you come back and do more workshops for us.
I would love to. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely night.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Namaste.
Namaste.